A man worth $900 million was standing in the rain, bidding $43 on a dead stranger's locker. He wore a canvas work coat gone soft at the elbows and boots that had crossed 1,000 muddy lots and a knit cap pulled low against the cold. Nobody in that gravel yard in Dayton, Ohio, gave him a second look. And the man running the auction, the man holding the bolt cutters, had spent that very same morning deciding whether to become a thief. His name was Russell Pike. He was 54 years old, and that week he had learned exactly what his honesty was worth. $11.40 an hour, minus taxes, minus the cost of his pride. Russell managed Miami Valley Self-Storage, a long row of orange doors behind a fence on the edge of town. He'd worked there 19 years. He knew which units flooded in March, which tenants paid in cash and which paid in excuses, and which locks were rusted so bad you had to lean your whole weight into the cutters. He knew the place the way a man knows a marriage. Every crack, every quiet. What he did not know, that gray Tuesday in November, was that the stranger in the work coat had been looking for him for 11 years. Stay with me, because the box those bolt cutters were about to open had been waiting 40 years to be found. To understand the choice in front of Russell, you have to understand the kitchen table he'd left that morning. His wife, Doreen, had sat at it in her robe, her right hand curled the way it had curled since the stroke. 18 months ago, she'd been a school cafeteria cook who could carry 2 trays and a coffee pot without spilling a drop. Now she practiced gripping a spoon for an hour a day, and on the good days she cried because it was getting better, and on the bad days she cried because it wasn't. The rehabilitation she needed cost money they did not have. The number on the last statement was $31,218, and it grew every month like something alive. Russell had stopped opening the envelopes. He kept them in a drawer the way you keep a thing you're ashamed of. That morning, Doreen had reached across the table with her good hand and held his wrist. "We'll figure it," she said. The stroke had taken the smooth edges off her words, but not the meaning. "We always figure it." Russell had kissed her forehead and driven to work, and somewhere on Route 4 he had started doing math no honest man should do. Because there was a unit at the back of the lot, number 114, and Russell knew what was inside it. By law, when a tenant stops paying, the storage company can auction the contents to recover the debt. Unit 114 had gone 3 months unpaid. The tenant on file was a man named Leon Brandt, and Leon Brandt was dead. No next of kin, no phone that rang. Just 3 months of silence and a padlock in the orange door. Russell had cut that lock the week before to make the legal inventory. Most defaulted units were a sad little museum of a life nobody wanted. Broken lamps, tax returns from the 90s, a child's bicycle with 1 wheel. But Leon Brandt's unit had been different. Neat. Spare. A man who owned little and kept it square. And taped to the underside of a metal shelf, where no inventory would ever catch it, Russell had found a steel ammunition can the size of a lunchbox, painted army green, latched and heavy. He'd opened it alone, in the dark, with his heart going hard. Inside was a gold pocket watch, the real kind, the heavy kind. A roll of silver dollars wrapped in a handkerchief, the old peace dollars from the 1920s. A sealed bank envelope with a thickness to it that needed no explanation. And a packet of letters tied with kitchen string. Russell had stood in that unit doing the worst arithmetic of his life. The watch alone, maybe 2,000. The coins, more. The envelope, who knew? Nobody had inventoried it. Nobody knew it existed. The tenant was dead. The next of kin was a blank line on a form. It would cover Doreen's rehab. It would buy back his wife's right hand. And here is the thing the world should know about Russell Pike. This was not the first time a defaulted unit had handed him a fortune and a temptation in the same breath. 11 years before, he'd found $9,000 in a coffee can in a unit owned by an old widow who'd missed her payments while she was dying in a hospice 40 miles away. He had not auctioned it. He had driven to the hospice on his own gas and put the can in her hands 2 days before she passed, and she had laughed and given him a butterscotch candy from her bedside drawer, and he had eaten it in the parking lot and not told a soul. There were other times. A wedding ring returned to a man who'd lost his unit during a divorce and his mind soon after. A folder of immigration papers carried across town to a family who thought they'd lost their whole future in an orange box. Russell never kept what wasn't his. He'd lost commissions doing it. He'd lost a bonus the year his boss found out and called him, to his face, the dumbest honest man in Ohio. But Russell had never had a wife with a hand that wouldn't open. So that morning, for the first time in 19 years, Russell Pike had stood over a stranger's steel box and let himself imagine keeping it. Now hold that picture. Because the auction was at 1 o'clock, and the man in the work coat was already in the lot. The buyers came every other Tuesday. Resellers, mostly. People who flipped lockers for a living and had stopped seeing the lives inside them. There was Tammy, who ran a booth at the flea market and bid hard and fair. There were the two brothers who only wanted tools. And lately, for about a year, there had been the old man. Russell didn't know his name. He came in a pickup that was 20 years old and spotless, which was a strange combination if you thought about it, and Russell had thought about it. He never bid much. He never flipped anything that Russell could tell. He'd buy one unit, sometimes none, and he'd go through it slow, like a man reading a book he already knew the ending to. The first time they'd spoken, the old man had asked Russell a question no reseller ever asked. Not what's in it or what's it worth. He'd asked, "Did somebody live a real life in this one?" Russell had laughed, because he didn't know what else to do. But he'd answered honest. "This one, no. This one's just storage." But the back row, those are the lives. The old man had nodded like Russell had said something important. Then he'd tipped him. Not the round 20 a man hands a stranger. $43, counted out exact, pressed into Russell's hand. "For the honest answer," he'd said. 43. Russell had wondered at it for a week. The old man had given his name once, plain, the way you hand it to a clerk. Denzel Washington. Russell had filed it away and thought nothing more of it, because a name on a quiet man in a worn coat at a storage auction tells you nothing, and Russell had long ago stopped guessing at the lives behind the faces in his lot. Today the old man stood under the eave of the office, out of the rain, watching the orange doors like he was waiting for one of them to speak. And when Russell walked the buyers down the row, the old man asked his question again, low, just for Russell. "Anything back here hold a real life?" Russell felt the steel box like a stone in his stomach. 114, he heard himself say. Fella named Leon, lived spare, kept things square. The old man went very still. A held breath. A drop of rain hung off the brim of his cap and did not fall. "Leon," he said, and then nothing. He just nodded and stepped back into the shadow of the eave, and Russell told himself the look on the old man's face was the cold. Here is the part where you should lean in, because the bidding is about to begin, and Russell has not yet decided which kind of man he is going to be. Russell ran the auction the way he always did, fast and flat. Most units went for $10, $20. The two brothers took a unit of garage junk for $15. Tammy took one of furniture for $30. Then they came to 114. Russell rolled the door up. The buyers crowded the line you weren't allowed to cross, shining their phone lights into the dark. They saw what Russell wanted them to see. A spare unit. A dead man's careful little nothing. Some boxes, a shelf, a folded cot. No glint of gold. No roll of silver. Because the steel box was not in the unit anymore. The steel box was in Russell's truck, under the seat where he had put it that morning. "Start me at 5, Russell said. Tammy glanced in and shook her head. The brothers passed, and from the back, quiet, the old man's voice. 5! Nobody else bid! Russell could have closed it right there for $5, and the old man would have hauled away a unit of boxes and never known what was missing, and Russell would have driven home with $31,000 worth of someone else's life under his seat, and his wife would have gotten her hand back, and no living person on this earth would ever have known. Russell opened his mouth to say, "Sold," and he thought of a butterscotch candy melting in his mouth in a hospice parking lot. He thought of 19 years of being the dumbest, honest man in Ohio. He thought of Doreen's good hand on his wrist that morning. We always figure it. "Do I hear 10? Russell said, and his voice cracked, and he wasn't bidding the unit up. He was buying himself time, and he knew it. 10. Anybody. Going once. 43, said the old man. Russell looked at him. The whole lot looked at him. Nobody jumps a $5 locker to 43. The old man held Russell's eyes the way he had a year ago when he'd pressed those exact bills into his hand. $43, the old man said again, soft. For the honest answer. Russell's throat closed. Sold, he managed. 114. $43. The buyers drifted off to load their units. The rain thickened. And Russell Pike stood in front of an open orange door, knowing he had a choice still to make, because the auction had decided who owned the boxes, but it had not decided who owned the box. He could keep the steel can. The sale didn't cover it. Legally, it was a gray thing, and morally it was not. and Russell had always known the difference even when the law didn't. He watched the old man carry boxes to that immaculate old pickup, one at a time, slow, like each one weighed more than it did. And Russell did the only thing a man like Russell could do. He went to his truck. He took the steel box out from under the seat, and he carried it across the wet gravel to the old man. "Sir," Russell said, "this was in your unit, taped under a shelf. It wasn't in the inventory, and it wasn't in the sale. So by rights, it's yours. The whole unit's yours. But I want you to know I found it before today, and I want you to know what's inside before you think it's nothing." The old man set down the box in his hands. He looked at the green steel can. He did not reach for it. "Open it," he said. "I want to see your hands open it." It was a strange thing to ask. Russell did it anyway. He unlatched the can right there in the rain, and the old man looked down at the watch, and the silver, and the bank envelope, and the letters tied with string. And Denzel Washington, the stranger in the work coat, the man worth $900 million, put his hand over his own mouth and made a sound Russell would remember for the rest of his life. "Stay with me." Because the stranger had just seen something Russell could not see. And what he'd seen was going to break a 40-year silence wide open. Denzel picked up the packet of letters with a hand that shook. He untied the kitchen string. He didn't read them. He just held the top photograph that fell loose, a small square photo gone soft and yellow, and he turned it so Russell could see. A young man in a wool coat stood on a riverbank in winter light. He was holding a baby against his chest, awkward, careful, the way men hold babies when they're terrified of dropping them and would die before they did. On the back, in pencil, someone had written, "Rusty. 6 months. The Great Miami, June." The Great Miami was the river that ran through Dayton. It ran 2 miles from where they stood. "Do you know this man?" the old man asked. Russell looked at the photo and felt the floor of the world tilt, because he didn't know the man. But he knew the river. And he knew, in the deep, wordless place where the oldest memories live, the word Rusty. Nobody had called him Rusty since he was small, before the Pikes adopted him, before the county. From the time he could never quite reach, there was a gravel voice that called him Rusty and the cold smell of a river and a pair of arms that held him like he was the only thing worth holding. "I don't," Russell whispered. "But that's a name nobody's called me since I was a boy." The old man's eyes came up off the photo and onto Russell's face, and they searched it the way you search a room in the dark for the thing you dropped years ago. "What did you say your name was?" the old man said. "Pike. Russell Pike. What was it before Pike?" And Russell, 54 years old, standing in the rain in a storage lot, said the thing he almost never said because it embarrassed him, because it marked him as a thing the world had set down and walked away from. "I was a foster kid," he said, "adopted at 7. I never knew my people. The county had my birth name as Brandt." He stopped. "Russell Brandt." The old man closed his eyes. "We are going to step back 40 years now, because you've earned the truth, and so has Russell." Denzel Washington was the name his mother gave him in 1960, and over the decades the world had learned to say it with money and respect. But in 1976 it was only the name of a 16-year-old runaway sleeping under the 3rd Street Bridge in Dayton, cardboard for a mattress, frostbite working into his toes. He'd run from a foster home that fed its kids less than its dogs. He had nothing and nobody. And on the coldest night of that winter, when he had honestly begun to think about lying down in the snow and not getting up, a man came down the riverbank with a thermos and a wool blanket. The man's name was Leon Brandt. He ran a one-man scrap and salvage yard by the Great Miami. He had a gravel voice and hands like cracked leather and a way of looking at a person that didn't measure them for what they could give. Leon didn't preach. He didn't call anybody. He just said, "You'll freeze down here. I got a cot in the yard office and a hot plate. You can sweep for your supper." And the boy who would one day be worth $900 million followed a stranger up a riverbank because the stranger had a blanket, and that one decision had saved his entire life. Leon Brandt put a roof over that boy for 2 years, taught him to weigh copper and read a man's intentions and keep his word. Leon had only one rule, said the same way every time, like scripture. A man keeps the small promises. The big ones take care of themselves. But Leon carried a grief he didn't talk about, and one night, late, with the river going by in the dark, he talked about it anyway. He'd had a wife and a baby boy. The wife had died young. And Leon, drinking too much and working too little in his grief, had lost the boy to the county. They'd taken him. A man with no wife, no steady work, no proof he could be trusted with a child. By the time Leon got himself straight, the boy was adopted out, the record sealed, The name changed, the trail gone cold as the river in January. His name was Russell, Leon had said that night, staring at the water. Rusty. He's out there somewhere with another man's name and he don't know I ever wanted him. Leon had looked at the boy he was sheltering, this runaway he'd pulled off the bank, and something passed between them that neither of them ever named. You get on your feet someday, Leon said. You find my boy. You tell him his daddy looked. You make sure he's not alone in the world like you and me. Promise me the small thing. The big one will take care of itself. And the boy promised. Then the boy got on his feet, the way some boys do, all at once and from nowhere. A scholarship, an idea, a company, money like water. He came back to Dayton at 30 to keep his promise and found the scrapyard sold, and Leon gone, no forwarding, just gone the way poor men go, leaving no paper behind. For decades he searched. He paid investigators. He combed sealed adoption records that would not open. He learned that the boy named Russell Brandt had been adopted, renamed, and lost, and that Leon Brandt had died alone, and that the only thing Leon had left behind was a rented storage unit somewhere in the Miami Valley, 3 months unpaid. Once, late, an old letter of Leon's had told him this, that Leon kept everything that mattered in a steel box in a rented room, because a man who's lost a house learns to keep his life small enough to carry. So for 11 years, the man worth $900 million had driven an old pickup to storage auctions across Ohio in a worn coat so no one would treat him like money, looking for a green steel box in the careful spare life of a man named Leon. He had bought 100 dead men's lockers. He had never found Leon. Until a tired, honest manager said the word Leon and then carried a green steel box across the rain and opened it with his own hands rather than keep the fortune inside it. Now come back to the lot. Come back to the rain. Because the old man has just understood that he is standing in front of Leon's son, and the son does not know it yet. And this is the lowest point, because in the next breath, everything nearly goes wrong. The old man's knees went, just slightly, and Russell caught his arm. "Sir, you all right? You need to sit?" The old man couldn't speak. He was looking at Russell's face and seeing Leon's jaw, Leon's brow, the same set to the shoulders. 40 years of a promise he'd thought he'd failed was standing in front of him, holding his arm and asking if he was all right. And the old man, overwhelmed, did the wrong thing. He pulled away. He muttered, "I have to go. I'm sorry. I have to go." And he put the steel box and Leon's photo into his truck with shaking hands, and he drove off through the gate, and Russell stood in the rain watching the taillights blur, certain he had upset the strange old man somehow, certain he'd said the wrong thing about being a foster kid, certain he'd given away $31,000 to a stranger who couldn't even say thank you. He drove home to Doreen. He didn't tell her about the box. How do you tell your sick wife you held her healing hand in a green steel can and gave it away? He sat at the kitchen table and put his head down, and Doreen rubbed his back with her good hand and said, "We'll figure it." And for the first time in their marriage, Russell did not believe her. That night, there was an envelope in the drawer he hadn't opened. The storage company's owner, Garrett Voss, had left him a message. The November numbers were short. Garrett was selling the facility in the spring. Russell's job was gone either way. The dumbest honest man in Ohio was about to be the unemployed dumbest honest man in Ohio. Russell lay awake and did the cruelest math of all. The math of what his honesty had cost. $31,000. A bonus, years ago. And now, maybe, the last job he'd ever hold. Here is what you have been waiting for. Here is where the small promise comes back to collect. 3 days later, a car came up the gravel at Miami Valley Self-Storage that did not belong there. It was long and black and silent, the kind of car that makes a gravel lot look poor. A driver opened the back door, and out stepped the old man, except he wasn't wearing the work coat now. He wore a charcoal suit that had been made for his body and no other, and good shoes, and on his wrist, plain as morning, Russell saw the gold flash of a watch worth more than the building. It was the same man, the same kind eyes, the same gravel stranger face. But the disguise was gone, and the truth was standing in it. Russell came out of the office wiping his hands on a rag, and the words died in his mouth. "Mr. Pike," he said. "Russell, you've known my name for a year. Denzel Washington. What you never knew was the rest of it." He let that settle in the cold air. "I came to these auctions for 11 years in an old truck because I didn't want a soul treating me like what I am. I wanted the truth out of people. And 3 days ago, you gave me more truth than I have been given in 40 years. He held out the small, soft photograph. Rusty. 6 months. The Great Miami. June. That is you, Denzel said. And the man holding you is your father. His name was Leon Brandt. He pulled me off a riverbank when I was 16 and freezing and worth nothing to anyone, and he kept me alive for 2 years and asked me for exactly one thing in return. The old man's voice broke clean in half. He asked me to find his boy and make sure he wasn't alone. I have been looking for you, Russell, since before you had gray in your hair. I bought 100 dead men's lockers looking for a green steel box. I found you because you carried it to me in the rain instead of keeping the fortune inside it. Russell stood very still. A held breath. The whole lot of orange doors went quiet. My father, Russell said. The word came out of him like it had been waiting 50 years for permission. He looked for me every day until the day he died. He kept your photograph in a steel box because a man who's lost a house learns to keep his whole life small enough to carry. The old man pressed the photo into Russell's hand, the way he'd once pressed $43. He never stopped wanting you. I'm here to tell you that. That was the small promise. And the small promise, Russell, just took care of the big one. Russell Pike, 54 years old, sat down on the wet edge of a parking block and wept the way men weep when something they buried alive finally gets to breathe. Now, you might think the story ends with a sad man learning his dead father loved him, and that would be a fine ending, and a true one. But the old man had a promise to keep, and Leon Brandt's only rule had been about keeping them. Denzel sat down beside Russell on the parking block, suit and all, in the gravel, and he put a hand on the back of Russell's neck the way a father might. Leon told me a man keeps the small promises, he said. So here are mine. Your wife is named Doreen. I had someone find that out, and I hope you'll forgive me. Her rehabilitation, the real kind, the place in Cincinnati with the waiting list, that's handled, starting Monday, for as long as it takes. That's the first small promise. Russell tried to speak and couldn't. Your boss is selling this facility in the spring. He's a decent man drowning in his own debts. I had that checked too. I'm buying it, not to flip it. I want you to run it, the way you've been running it, like the lives in the boxes matter, because they do, and because the world has exactly one Russell Pike and I'd be a fool to let him go looking for work. That's the second, Denzel stood. He helped Russell up by the arm. And the third, he took, from his suit, the green steel can. The watch, the silver, the bank envelope, still sealed. Your father left this. It's yours. I didn't open the envelope. I figured a son ought to be the one. He pressed it into Russell's hands. Whatever's in it, Russell, the most valuable thing in that box was never the gold. It was that you handed it to a stranger before you let it make you into someone your father wouldn't know. Russell held the can against his chest the way the young man in the photo had held the baby. Careful, terrified to drop it, ready to die before he did. Doreen got her place in Cincinnati. By spring, she could button her own coat, and by summer she could carry a coffee pot across the kitchen without spilling, and the morning she did it, she set it down and cried, and this time Russell cried with her, and they were the good kind. Russell opened the bank envelope alone, one night, at the kitchen table. It wasn't a fortune. It was $411 in a folded note and a gravel-handed scrawl. The note said, "For Rusty, when I find you, start something. Love, your dad." Leon had been saving $400 to give the son he never found. He'd died with it, sealed in a steel box, still believing he'd hand it over someday. Russell framed the note. He hung it in the office at Miami Valley Self-Storage, where he still works, where he still cuts the rusted locks and returns the wedding rings and carries the immigration papers across town and loses the commissions and does not care. The dumbest honest man in Ohio. The luckiest one, too. And Denzel Washington, the man worth $900 million, comes by sometimes in the old pickup, and he and Russell sit in the office and drink Folgers out of paper cups and don't say much. Two men connected by a riverbank and a blanket and a promise that took 40 years and one honest decision to keep. Here's what I keep thinking about. Russell almost kept that box. He had every reason. A sick wife, a mountain of debt, a dead owner, a blank line where the next of kin should be. The whole world would have understood. Nobody would ever have known. But Russell would have known. And the thing about the small promises we make to ourselves, the quiet ones, the ones nobody is watching us keep, is that they are the ones that decide who we are when the big moment finally comes. Russell had practiced being honest in 1,000 rooms where it cost him and no one saw. So when honesty cost him everything, his hands already knew what to do. Leon Brandt was right. A man keeps the small promises, and the big ones take care of themselves. So I'll leave you with this. There is a box in your life right now that you could keep and no one would know. A favor you could pocket. A truth you could swallow. A kindness you could skip because you're tired and the world owes you and nobody is looking. Keep the small promise anyway. You have no idea who's been looking for you for 40 years, or what carrying the box across the rain might cost, or what it might give back. If this story moved you, do something small and honest today, and then come tell me about it in the comments. I read them. And if you've ever been the person who did the right thing when it cost you, when no one was watching, when the whole world would have forgiven you for doing wrong, then this story was about you, and I see you, even if no one else ever did. Subscribe and stay honest, and I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional, dramatized story created for storytelling and entertainment purposes. The character named Denzel Washington in this narrative is entirely fictional and is not intended to represent, depict, or imply anything about the real actor Denzel Washington or any actual person. All characters, names, businesses, events, and dialogue are products of imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or to actual events is purely coincidental. The themes explored here, honesty, family, second chances, are meant to inspire reflection, not to depict real individuals or guarantee real outcomes.